While playing through the pixel remasters of Final Fantasy 1 to 3, I was hit by a realization. I thought to myself, Final Fantasy 2 is kind of the best of these, isn't it? And then it dawned on me that this is a bit of a controversial opinion to have. It is reasonably well known that Final Fantasy 2 is regarded as the black sheep of the franchise, at least until Final Fantasy 13 came along and claimed that title for itself. FF2 frequently lands among the bottom rung of any lists ranking the Final Fantasy games, and even here on YouTube it's hard to avoid stumbling upon negative opinions about it when looking the game up. So yeah, naturally I decided to join the glorious ranks of Final Fantasy 2 defenders. Here's my credentials. I've beaten Final Fantasy 2 at least 3 times, twice on the Dawn of Souls version for the Game Boy Advance, and once on the Pixel Remaster version. You can find my Let's Play of that version on my channel, so that one's even documented. I'm also currently making my way through the NES version, just so no one can say I only enjoy the game because of the quality of life changes introduced in later versions. And you know what? I'm having a blast with it. Yes, compared to later versions it's slower, clunkier, has more bugs, and is more obtuse, but it makes up for that with its retro charm, and it's still the bleak and beautiful gem I fell in love with at heart, with the same addicting gameplay. Alright, without further ado, let's get into why Final Fantasy 2 is good. Only before I can do that, I first need to tell you why Final Fantasy 2 sucks, actually. Alright, jokes aside, as much as I love it, FF2 is a flawed game, and I will now go into some of the common criticisms about it that I feel are warranted. We'll check out the unwarranted ones later. Criticism 1. Leveling spells kinda sucks. I agree with this one. Having to level up each spell individually instead of having broader spell categories that level up multiple spells at once can be very time consuming. I mean, we don't level up individual weapons, just weapon skills, so why not have a similar system for spells? We'll go into the intricacies of the leveling system later. Criticism 2. Dungeon design. Some of the dungeons in FF2 are very long, which can be a drag when combined with the high encounter rate. What compounds this problem is that the designers decided to put a bunch of what I like to call trap rooms in their dungeons. Imagine yourself standing in front of a row of doors. One of the doors either leads to progress or a room full of treasure. Isn't that nice? Every other door leads to an empty room in which the encounter rate is cranked up to 11. Not so nice. Yeah, there's really no defending this one, especially since these trap rooms are just there to waste your time and resources. There's no interesting strategic decision to be made here. You have to try all the doors, because behind one of them might be something good, or even the only path forward in the dungeon. They're kinda annoying. At least the Pixel Remaster alleviates this somewhat by removing random encounters from these trap rooms altogether, but yeah, still annoying. But hey, they by no means ruin a game. Now, there is another, much more common criticism of this game, but I personally think that the thing being criticized is a positive. So I'll mention it in the next section, where we'll finally talk about why Final Fantasy 2 is good. For this purpose, I have prepared something that everyone on YouTube loves. A numbered list! Here's the 5 reasons why Final Fantasy 2 is good. Number 1. The leveling system. Final Fantasy 2 is part of a proud lineage of experimental NES sequels. Games like Zelda 2 Adventures of Link or Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest that significantly changed their gameplay formula and are often polarizing for that reason. Final Fantasy 2 experiments by completely doing away with the classic XP and level system of its predecessor, in favor of a learning by doing approach that will be familiar to Elder Scrolls fans. If you swing a sword in combat, you get better at swinging swords. If you cast a lot of spells, those spells will improve and you'll get more MP to cast them. If you get hit a lot, your HP will increase, helping you sustain more damage in the future. In addition, every character can learn every spell and use every piece of equipment. There are some restrictions to the system, however. In the NES version, increasing certain stats has a chance of making a different corresponding stat to go down. This usually translates to, if you increase stats that make you a better fighter, your spell enhancing stats may go down and vice versa. This is supposed to encourage you to make a balanced party. This was taken out in future versions, however, giving you a little more freedom. Another thing is that certain equipment carries certain penalties with it. Most weapons, as well as heavy armor, carries a certain magic penalty that reduces the effectiveness of your spells. Heavy equipment will also make it so that it's harder for you to evade attacks. This is supposed to stop players from making characters that are just amazing at everything, but you can still make some decent hybrid builds. At least in the Pixel Remaster version. As I demonstrated in my Let's Play, where I made Firion into a sort of paladin type character, who used both white magic as well as sword and shield. The magic penalty was removed in the Game Boy Advance and PSP versions of the game, so if you want more freedom in exchange for less balance, check out those versions of the game. While this character progression is probably not as fleshed out as it could have been, I already mentioned the tedium of leveling spells, it is still an incredibly fun system to engage with. For me, one of the most fundamentally appealing aspects of RPGs is just to see my numbers go up as I level my characters. Instead of offering you the occasional increase on a level up, FF2 gives you small, incremental stat increases almost every combat, which is so much more satisfying to me, especially since these increases are targeted. You chose to level that specific stat through the actions you took in combat. This more granular approach to building your characters is incredibly satisfying, and I desperately wish more games would adopt it. It is so addicting to play this game, it becomes hard to stop, because you wanna do just one more fight so you can get that fire spell up to level 4, or get your frontliner's HP into triple digits. I absolutely love it. Now, there is one aspect of this leveling system that is at the core of the criticism of almost every single negative review of this game. In Final Fantasy II, as well as most Final Fantasy games from here on out, you can target your own party members. This was likely done so that you could do things like hitting a sleeping ally with a physical attack in order to wake them up. The side effect of this is that a pretty efficient way to grind in this game is to have your characters beat each other up in combat, since this will prolong fights, because you're not targeting the opponent, and you usually do more damage than most low-level enemies, making this method particularly good for leveling HP. Now, people love to say that FF2 is a game where your party members have to clobber each other in order to get stronger. Almost everyone who derides this game points to this one mechanic as the smoking gun as to why Final Fantasy II is bad. And I don't get it. First of all, you don't have to use it. It's helpful for getting HP, sure, but it's certainly not required to finish the game. And second of all, it's fucking awesome that the game lets you do this, since it's giving you one more option to engage with the leveling system. In fact, I think it would have felt weird to leave this out. If you can target your party members, why wouldn't you be able to spar in order to get better? Granted, it is a bit strange to have the enemies watch you while you beat the shit out of each other, but so are a lot of game mechanics. They're abstractions, after all. It should also be mentioned that doing this method of leveling in front of low-level enemies becomes less efficient as your stats increase, since an enemy's rank is added as a modifier to the amount of experience gained to a certain stat. So people claiming that it's efficient to just beat yourself up in front of early game mobs all game are straight up wrong. People act like this ruins the game, when I think it elevates it. Since when is giving the player more options to engage with a game's system a bad thing? You can do so much cool shit with this too, like targeting one of your casters with the sap spell, training their MP, and basically guaranteeing an MP increase after combat. I love RPGs with intricate systems that can be abused if you want to. Morrowind is a beloved classic, and it's a game you can absolutely break in half if you know what you're doing. But when FF2 does something similar, and much less extreme I might add, it's suddenly a bad thing? I really don't get it. People who make this point are completely alien to me. Now, there is another criticism that I do kind of agree with, but it's related less to the leveling system itself and more to how it interacts with the structure of the game. In FF2, you have 3 main characters: Firion, Maria, and Guy. They will always be in your party and are always worth building up. But you also get a 4th party member slot that is occupied by a rotating cast of characters who come and go as the story demands. Due to the fact that most of these are temporary, they're rarely worth the time investment required to get them up to the level of your free mains. So you'll often have to carry some dead weight around in dungeons. This doesn't really hurt the game too much though, in my opinion. So yeah, in conclusion, Final Fantasy II's leveling system is fucking awesome and is the main thing that makes me keep coming back to it. However, it's far from the only aspect that makes the game great, which leads us to number 2. The invention of series staples. This is a comparatively minor point to be fair, but it should still be mentioned. Final Fantasy II is the birthplace of a lot of iconic elements that remain with the series to this day. This game has the first iteration of the Chocobo, a flightless bird that your party can mount in order to traverse the world unimpeded by random encounters. It also features the first instance of a character named Sid, a crotchety old engineer and inventor of airships, who would become a staple recurring character trope in each Final Fantasy thereafter. This is also the first time we meet the iconic Behemoth monster, in form of a climactic boss battle, and it's the first instance of the famous Ultima spell as well. There's probably a bunch more I'm missing, but this small selection shall suffice for now. All these iconic staples contribute to the fact that, despite all its differences, Final Fantasy II feels much more like a Final Fantasy game than its predecessor. Sure, FF1 introduced some iconic designs like the white and black mage and the widely used motif of elemental crystals, but for the most part it feels more like a D&D derivative, with all its monsters being taken directly from the monster manual and such. FF2 is a lot more of that Final Fantasy vibe to it, if that makes sense. But of course, vibes alone don't make for a good RPG. You know what else you need? An interesting world to explore. So, how does FF2 stack up on that front? Let's find out. Number 3. The world. Final Fantasy I's world map is a masterclass in JRPG world design. It's a giant puzzle box that gradually opens up as the player unlocks more vehicles and finds more key items. It strikes the perfect balance between giving players more and more freedom as the game progresses, yet still limiting them just enough that they remain curious about all the strange places they don't have access to yet. For Final Fantasy II, the designers probably realized they couldn't really improve on this concept, so they went with the complete opposite approach. Apart from a handful of islands, the entirety of FF2's world is comprised of one giant landmass. As soon as you get to Canoe in Final Fantasy II, which happens within the first hour of play, almost the entire world is your oyster. The only thing stopping you from going wherever you want right from the get-go is the power of the monsters lurking far beyond your home. This can be circumvented, however, by A. excessive grinding, or B. clever use of the world's only chocobo. You can get to the final town of the game, which sells endgame equipment and spells, from the very start with just a little bit of luck and tenacity. Of course, you won't be able to afford any of this equipment without farming a lot of money, but there's tricks for doing that too. Now, of course you don't have to do any of this. You can just follow the plot and gradually explore the world by just advancing the story. But the fact that you can is wonderful to me. Open world design is still pretty rare in JRPGs, even to this day, and I am convinced we have Akitoshi Kawazu to thank for seeing it here so early. He was one of the designers for Final Fantasy II, and you can see a lot of the game's elements in his later Romancing Saga series of games, which are basically open world JRPGs as well, but with a far more open narrative approach to boot, and a similarly open-ended character progression system. The vastness and openness of FF2's world makes it feel more real and alive than the more gamey world designs of FF1, and especially 3. Another factor that contributes to this more natural feel is FF2's infrastructure. The player still unlocks a boat, and later on an airship during the course of the game, but long before that they have the option of charting both of these vehicles to travel to a certain location for a price. There's the two port towns of Palum and Poft, which are connected via ship travel, giving the player the option to either pay for safe and comfy passage or take the route on foot, which is more dangerous, but also gives you the opportunity to fight more battles and build up your characters. The airship is much more expensive, but can take the player to many different locations, giving them yet more options on how they want to approach exploring the world. And that's really the key word on what makes FF2 so appealing. Options. You have so many options on how you want to play this game, and they're meaningful options too. It's not like Final Fantasy III, where the game gives you this huge selection of jobs, but then half of the dungeons restrict you to a certain party setup anyway, or a lot of the jobs are just straight up better than others, leading to an illusion of choice a lot of the time. However, the sheer amount of choice FF2 provides can also lead to the players feeling lost and overwhelmed in this strange and dangerous land. But what if I told you that this is a good thing as well? Number 4. The struggle. Now, I wouldn't say FF2 is a particularly hard game. FF3's endgame dungeons are definitely more difficult, but it can certainly feel like more of a struggle, what with its vast, oppressive world and its deep and treacherous dungeons. FF3 feels a lot more welcoming with its short and breezy dungeons, apart from the final one, and it's easing you in with a tutorial cave. But it also feels much less substantial as a result. Getting from A to B in FF2 feels like a dangerous journey, whereas doing the same in FF3's much more compressed world and areas kind of feels like nothing? The fact that FF2's dungeons are so long may be a valid point of criticism levied against it, but it also made those dungeons more tangible and familiar to me, because I had to spend so much time in them. I know this point is a lot more esoteric than the last ones, and I won't dwell on it for too long, but Final Fantasy II to me feels like more of a memorable adventure, precisely because it puts up a lot more resistance, and everything takes a little longer. Spending a lot of time with a game's world breeds familiarity, and that's not something I can say about every JRPG. I'm not saying FF2 is good because it's hard, because it's really not that hard. I'm saying FF2 is good because it forces you to engage with it, when some other RPGs just give up all they have to offer willy-nilly. The sense of struggle also feeds into my final point about what makes this game so special. Its story. Number 5. The story. FF2 is the first game in the series that tries to tell a serious story with actual characters instead of blank slate player stand-ins. There's not much to these characters, to be fair, this is still an 8-bit RPG after all, but their visual designs suggests a lot about their personalities. Especially Firion, whose colorful and flamboyant style is very appealing to look at. FF2's story is about the struggle against an oppressive empire whose grasp on the world seems impossible to break. That's nothing new, Star Wars did it, and it's definitely not the last time a Final Fantasy game would be about rebels fighting an empire, but it is unique among its peers in the 8-bit Final Fantasy trilogy. It's a simple story, about good guys versus bad guys, but what makes it special is the way that it's told. Instead of a series of almost unrelated vignettes that feel like busy work, everything you do in FF2 is working towards the goal of overthrowing the empire, and you can see tangible results of your efforts reflected in the game world. For example, an early mission in the game has you go to a mine and secure mithril ore for the rebels' war effort. In the course of that mission, you free a bunch of people enslaved by the empire, who now go back to being regular NPCs in their hometown. And once you've secured the mithril, not only does that progress the story, it also gives you the ability to buy new mithril equipment for your characters. You get a tangible reward for your efforts. It's more than an arbitrary fetch quest like so many quests in FF1. A lot of Final Fantasy II's early game consists of your characters, orphans whose home was destroyed by the Empire, taking orders from Princess Hilda, the leader of the rebels. Kind of a breath of fresh air to take orders from a woman for a change, and not some generic fantasy king with a white beard. You really get a feeling that you're contributing to the fight against the Empire in a meaningful way with every mission you accomplish, and you're becoming more and more important to the rebellion as the story progresses as well. At first, Hilda scoffs at you for wanting to lend a hand to the cause, citing your lack of combat experience. But later, she respects and relies on you, because you have proven that you can get shit done. This sense of progression is completely absent in most other RPGs of the time, where most of the things you do seem like random unrelated vignettes. The Empire also isn't just a passive element, waiting to be overthrown by the heroes. Everything that happens in the plot that isn't the result of your actions is some horrible atrocity committed by the villain, who in the course of the story wipes entire towns from the map, which doesn't just show the Emperor's power in a narrative sense, but also deprives the player of resources in a gameplay sense. The Empire is a very active antagonistic force in the game, which is in stark contrast to the usual 8-bit RPG model, of the villains sitting on their ass all day, waiting for the heroes to come and kill them. Both of these elements, your actions having tangible results, and the Empire being a tangible threat, make Final Fantasy II's story so much more compelling than most of its contemporaries, despite its simple dialogue and characterization. The Emperor himself is also just fucking iconic. Highly underrated FF villain for real. It's not just his extravagant design, it's also the crazy shit he does in the story. It takes a while for him to actually appear in the flesh, but when he does, it's beautiful. I don't want to spoil anything though. Of course, these 5 reasons alone don't do the game justice on their own. FF2 is more than the sum of its parts. It just has a certain feel to it that is hard to put into words. This special feeling I get from playing FF2 is exemplified in some of its smaller moments, like seeing Cid's airship fly overhead on the world map, or running past the Emperor's castle in the Palamecian desert while riding on a chocobo. You gotta play the game yourself to see what I mean. If any of the things I mentioned in this video sound appealing to you, I highly recommend to give FF2 a chance. If you want a recommendation on which of the many versions to play, I'd honestly suggest you try the Pixel Remaster. However, I will also link a video by fellow YouTuber AustinSV in the description that goes into detail about all of the differences between the game's many versions. The Pixel Remaster is easily the most accessible and convenient way to play FF2, and goes on sale fairly often. It does lack some optional content that was added in the GBA and PSP versions of the game, but if you just want to experience the main story, this is the version to go with in my opinion. It's got a ton of quality of life features that make FF2 a smoother experience without cutting off too many of its edges. It also sits at a very positive on Steam right now, which is great to see. It suggests to me that people in the modern age are giving FF2 another chance, and discovering its many qualities for themselves. I hope I could contribute to this new perspective on the game with this video. So in conclusion, fuck the haters, FF2 is good, go play it.